Good morning, Dieter, and thank you very much for talking to me today. Now, Dieter, I thought I'd just read your biography very briefly, but I don't know how we can be brief with this because it's very long. So, Dieter, you was Professor Sir Dieter Helm, and you are Professor of Economic Policy at the University of Oxford and Fellow in Economics at New College, Oxford. And from 2012 to 2020, you were independent chair of the Natural Capital Committee, providing advice to the government on the sustainable use of natural capital. You provide extensive expert advice to UK and European governments, regulators, and companies across three key areas: energy and climate, regulation, utilities and infrastructure, and natural capital and the environment. Dieter is Vice President of the Exmoor Society, a Vice President of the Berkshire, Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire Wildlife Trust, and Honorary Fellow of Brasenose College in Oxford. Dieter, you're also a prolific author, and I've read many of your books. And your latest book, it's called Legacy: How to Build the Sustainable Economy, was published by Cambridge University Press in November 2023. Well, wow, welcome. Thank you very much for talking to me today.
Well, thanks very much for having me on.
Right. Okay. So just to sketch out the conversation then, Dieter, obviously we've got the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, which has now reached committee stage. And I'm sure that you've been following this and clearly with your infrastructure and economic head on. I'm not sure if the alarm bells are going for you, but certainly they are for the environment sector. With part 3 of the bill. But just to kind of look at the wider context of where we are now, the structural economic issues that the government are grappling with, and I guess these have been inherited, passed on from, successive governments. And it just doesn't seem that we have a long-term investment plan for the UK. We thought when Labour came into power, there was a chink of hope. They were talking about a green recovery, which to us was actually very exciting. It was about kickstarting the economy and really looking through, I guess, a different lens at the way that the UK was going to kind of push itself into the future from an economic perspective. So, we've had economic hardship for I don't know how many decades now. We haven't had the investment, particularly into UK infrastructure, I think, that we need. And I guess we've got to this point now where we're looking for this green recovery to happen, but we're building on a platform that is actually a little bit shallow. Do we think then that obviously we've ended up in this place where we've got the bill coming forward, the government are under pressure to do something to kickstart the economy, and the response is to build these 1.3 million homes and these mass infrastructure projects? And I think it's an easy place for governments to go, isn't it? When you're trying to kickstart something, you get right, build, build, build. That just seems like a really easy thing to do. But with the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, we're worried because it does, in part 3 of the bill, it does look at the environmental protections. So for species and habitats particularly, it feels that they are being absolutely shredded within the proposals that are on the table at the moment. I think all of us accept that there has to be changes to the planning bill, or the way that we do planning in the UK, and that there are some blockers in there. But we've ended up in this place now where this is a really dangerous moment, we feel, for nature and everything that certainly we've worked towards achieving and protecting over decades now. So, Dieter, what's your view on how we've ended up here? And is this a desperate bid for Labour to kind of kickstart economic growth, but seemingly at any cost?
Well, there's a lot of questions there, but I think the opening comment to make is that you and many environmental organisations are right to be not just concerned, but extremely alarmed at what's coming down the track. And to contextualise this, one has to roll back a bit. So at the time of Brexit, seems a long time ago, and indeed it's nearly a decade ago, we were promised that environmental protections would be better than they were under the European regime. The Environment Act, alongside the Agricultural Act and the earlier 2019 amendment to the Climate Change Act, these provided the framework, and that framework was built on the idea that we would leave the natural environment in a better state for the next generation than we inherited it. And that pathway was taken forward, primarily by Michael Gove's successors, and we got to the election, and the Labour opposition identified economic growth as what was necessary to raise the monies to pay for the public services. And, it wasn't just Labour. I mean, remember Liz Truss? She was going to have unfunded public expenditure for tax cuts. We had unfunded public expenditure on the health service in the autumn budget from Labour. Difference between the parties looking at the past record, not very different. And they all were concerned about infrastructure too within this framework. So what Labour has done is say economic growth means GDP growth, and they essentially have two planks to what they think is going to cause economic growth. And remember, they want to make us the fastest growing economy in the G7. Good luck with that. But they had two planks: build 1.5 million houses and sprint towards net zero electricity in 60 months. Now, neither of those policies are going to get delivered. They are impossible targets in the timetables in place, but they're both, if you like, if not panic measures, they're both extremely tight timetables. And the consequence has been that the government has focused on clearing out any and all obstacles that could get in the way of doing anything in respect to building houses. Green belt, oh, well, let's call half of it grey belt, and let's point out some of it's, untidy and scruffy and like old petrol stations. It is so crude. Let's get rid of the stuff about bats and newts. This is wasted enormous amount of money. These are environmental obstacles. And of course, it's true that if you really want to have an absolute priority of building that number of houses that quickly, you basically have to trample over a lot of environmental considerations. Now, what's wrong with all this? Well, there's nothing wrong with economic growth, providing it's sustainable economic growth. But GDP growth doesn't measure what is sustainable through time. Indeed, it can lead us to pursue policies which will not be sustained because they are unsustainable. So first of all, a sensible frame for what economic growth means. And secondly, in terms of the content, they seem to fail to understand, and it's a linked point, if you like, that nature, the environment, is the most important feature of any economy. And you can't grow an economy without nature. And that was the whole point of Michael Gove's time at Defra. I have no political interest in the parties in this frame, but it's also what we argued in the Natural Capital Committee, in which all three major parties at the time accepted. So they've got the wrong concept of growth. They're on a sprint, which creates this world of get all the obstacles out the way. And we have a prime minister in particular who thinks that the way to do performance politics is to signal to the population that, it's all about bats and newts. You almost feel him spitting out the words bats and newts, which displays, and I understand lots of people in this position, a fundamental ignorance about how the environment and ecosystems work. But, it's not for expectation that politicians will understand all this stuff. That's what advisors are for. That's what the wider discussion's about. And that's what lots of the environmental organisations are trying to point out. So far, very unsuccessfily.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And as we get to committee stage, I mean, do you think the government, and you've set up the fantastic frame there, I mean, we are one of the most nature depleted countries in the world now, and we've watched that happen over, certainly over my lifetime, since 1970 when I was born. And we'd lost an awful lot of natural capital and wildlife before then. Obviously, we've got the post-war Reconstruction years. And that push to the green revolution that was then, using more herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizer. The massive push to produce food, and we saw a massive transformation then in the British countryside. And obviously, we had heavy industry coupled on top of that. But now we really truly have ended up in a situation where we are one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, and we're trying to build on capital that actually almost doesn't exist anyway. So, I mean, how do government do this? How do we as humanity actually to survive something like this? Because it is truly transformational what they're talking about. I mean, what do you see a way through this, Dieter?
Well, it's not as if the narrative that you've just set out is not understood. I mean, all the parties, I think, pay lip service, at least, to the idea that, we really ought to do something about our natural environment. It is depleted, and we ought to take this forward and leave the next generation in a better state than we found it. It's easy for politicians to mumble that stuff too, and to tick the boxes in what they say publicly. But what matters is practically how you do it. And this isn't rocket science. Okay, so we have the building blocks in place. The environmental improvement plans were designed to be the way in which we progress towards this objective of leaving things in a better state, based on natural capital, which became the language and still is the language in which we see these things. And, the recognition that, well, how do you do that? Well, you have to do some spatial planning. You have to do some land use planning. You have to decide how the land is going to fit in this framework, and you have to do the protected stuff within that framework. Now, it's one of the features of politics which I think people outside are completely mystified by, that you can pursue two mutually incompatible objectives at the same time and go on doing that. Okay, so the government has, like its predecessor, plans, policies, initiatives, etc., to try to address some of these questions, at the same time as it has policies and objectives to get all these things out the way to build the houses. So the land use plan and the spatial plan could be a really good framework for how to take things forward. But they could also be a way of clearing out the obstacles to put as many houses in as many, let's face it, greenfield sites as possible. No builder on the planet wants to build an urban social housing project. They want to build on greenfield sites because we want to live in these sites, right? And then we're prepared to pay a premium for it. It's not a politician's fault. They're responding to what we, the public, want to do for ourselves, never mind the consequences more generally. Now, there was a time when we built 300,000 houses a year. That was basically for 30 years after the Second World War. People forget this. But how did we do it? Well, at least 150,000, half of them were built as social housing by the public sector. And, if you want to build lots of houses and you want to make sure that, given that our population is increasing at 750,000 per year, and, no political comment here, but we've had large scale immigration, which is the reason why the population's going up at the rate it is, you've got lots of urban spaces to build this, and it's environmentally much better to build inside urban areas than litter the countryside. And so we can do this. But the fear is that the government has become so committed to these short-term targets that thinking through how to put this thing together, how to make this generational change, has been sacrificed to, let's just get an announcement in 2029, we're on target for 1.5 million houses. I mean, they're going to have to explain why they're not achieving that target. And my guess is it'll be because, well, all the environmentalists got in the way. You can see that this is going to end perhaps even worse than it starts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's probably plenty of other blockers as to why we're not building houses at the moment. But I think we also have to acknowledge that I think it's about 1.5 million homes have already been granted planning permission across the UK. And these are nationally available statistics. So it's not as though we've got a shortage of places to build. Planning has already been granted. So what is stopping that now? I mean, we're hearing that they don't have the skills, they don't have the trades to be able to get on site, even start building these blooming places. So I can't see how they're going to get through that backlog and then build again. And why not just clear the backlog that we've got already? It just seems very odd.
Well, you're absolutely right that it actually isn't the lack of sites and planning permission that's holding things up. They're there. Okay, the point is that if you're a commercial house builder and you look at the world as it is at the moment, wouldn't you like better sites from their perspective? And hey, this is a government which they've finally persuaded to start chopping up the green belt, right? And, that's going to be much more worthwhile to the building sector than elsewhere. The second thing to say is it's not in any builder's interest to build 1.5 million houses, right? Because the more houses you build, the objective of government is to drive down house prices. That's a perfectly reasonable objective, right? But house builders don't want the price driven down. They want the price to stay up. So they have no incentive to deliver the number that's there. And what they have every incentive of doing is turning to the government saying, but give us more land of particular forms. Now, that's not to blame the house builders. They're just doing what's in their commercial incentives. It's for government to set the rules and the framework. Now, if you want to build 1.5 million houses, if you want to completely convert the electricity industry to essentially wind and solar within 60 months, right, then you really have to say, well, where is the supply chain? Where's the stuff coming from? Not just the workers, but where's the stuff coming from? 80% of the world's solar panels come from China. They come from largely Uyghur areas, and someone suddenly discovered that actually the way the Uyghurs are being treated is not within our framework of what's generally thought to be acceptable. Okay, if you look at almost all the supply chains on the energy side, they're almost entirely foreign. And if you say, look, actually, I want a transformer to build this bit of grid all over East Anglia or wherever it is that you want to put this thing up, you say, well, yeah, thanks for the order, but everyone else is ordering these as well. Could you wait 4 years for it? Well, no, we've got to have it tomorrow morning because it's our government target. We promised to do this. Well, okay, you pay top dollar. How much do you pay us to compensate the people who are going to have to turn off the order list to put on the place? Look at house building. Where's the timber coming from? Is the brick production really in place? Are we actually going to build houses which are net zero? Are we going to build quality houses, or are we just going to put them up as fast as possible to hit the target? So it comes back to this point that it may seem, politically performance stuff to say, we're going to do it. We're really going to do it quickly. We're going to get within 4 years or so to get to our manifesto, say, look, we did everything we said we're going to do. But actually, when you're really thinking about the state of our infrastructure, the state of our housing stock, and the state of our natural environment, what this moment is the opportunity to do is stand back and really think this thing through properly. Now, of course, there's quite a lot to be said for improving the processes of planning.
Yeah.
Right? And nobody thinks that we've arrived at the perfect planning system, okay? But there's a world of difference between looking at why the process doesn't work, and primarily that's because it's fantastically understaffed and under-supported in what needs to be done, and saying, we're going to get these particular kinds of outcomes. And so, what do you do? Well, how do you speed up? Let's cross out judicial review. It's a really important issue. You might want to change the terms a bit, but trying to cross out judicial review is really serious. Let's sort of shortcut things. Let's let's push aside all this stuff about net biodiversity gain and just stuff it in a national restoration fund. Again, could be a good thing to do, but it depends how it's done, who does it, and it could also be an awful thing to do because it could be excused not to take these things seriously. So I think for all the urgency of the issues, and I don't blame the government at all for saying that these things we have to get on with. We're not good at getting stuff done in the UK. It is a process which could be improved. I don't blame any of that stuff. It's entirely sensible, but it's all on the altar of short-term targets. That's the question, how to achieve the short-term targets, not how to have a sustainable planning infrastructure framework which fits with the goal of ensuring that nature is not trashed in the process, and make sure that it's understood right back from the Natural Capital Committee, etc., that natural capital is the most important component of sustainable economic growth.
Yeah, okay. So the Ministry of Housing, MHCLG, they seem to be calling the shots on this, and it feels like Defra is very much on the back foot. And obviously, Natural England is one of the Defra, or part of the Defra family, and they will be charged with managing this levy. It's it's a department that's cut anyway. Some fantastic people that work there, and they're not short of vision by any means. But I guess the worry is that within all of this, if Ministry of Housing are calling the shots at the end of the day, they're the paymaster. And you've got number 10 who are kind of fiddling around in there and ultimately making the decision. So out of, all of that sort of triangle of decision makers. I mean, I really feel for Defra in all of this, because their voice just doesn't seem to be there. And what hope do we have? And we've got the Office of Environmental Protection now as well, who's supposed to be standing back and looking at this. But everybody, who's standing up for the environment is kind of putting their hand up going, hang on a minute. We've got things like the precautionary principle, mitigation hierarchy, polluter pays principle. All of that is going in this bonfire. And yet we're layering on all of this responsibility, I guess, and through this levy is saying, well, we're going to have all these environment development plans and this and that and the other. It just feels a bit pie in the sky within the time frame that we're trying to work to here. And you said at the beginning of our conversation that we're probably not going to do that. So how on earth do you put in all of this, all of this administration in such a short period of time?
Well, the point about Defra is your point is extremely well made. It's being emaciated, right? It's not particularly new, but the great days of, again, I refer back, not for political reasons, but just to make the observation, the great days of Michael Gove are over. And we're much more in the world when Liz Truss was Secretary of State at Defra and Andrea Leadsom and others. But I mean, I think it's worse than that. I mean, the primary role of the Secretary of State at Defra appears to be to defend the Treasury's position vis-a-vis the farmers, which may or may not be a good thing. There's no argument on that. And to make sure that environmental concerns do not get in the way of house building and the infrastructure, particularly the energy infrastructure projects. So he's completely signed up to this. Perfectly understandable. They're part of a cabinet that's agreed these policies. And therefore, in a sense, it's a sort of almost a kind of PR exercise at Defra at the top to, try and put the nicest gloss on what's being done, recognizing what you're really going to do is make sure that the environmental bit and the department that you're supposed to be responsible for doesn't get in the way. And I fear that the consequence after the comprehensive spending review as well will be a sort of ghostly, shadowy Defra, and it beholds all the political parties to rethink how environment is integrated into government. And it was always thought that, so we're going to make the environment a part of every government department. Good luck with that. That has not happened. The environment needs a clear ministry in government which stands up for the environment and has secretaries of state who wish to look after their corner, as we'd expect the Secretary of State for Health to do, to look after the health corner in the frame. But I think, it isn't over yet. And dare I say it, from an environmental perspective, it's probably going to get worse. And I think the comprehensive spending review is going to be a serious marker along this way. I wish I could say otherwise. However, I think it's also an extremely important wake-up call to those who are concerned about the environment. I was horrified in the run-up to the election, in which environmental groups almost completely took the view, Conservatives bad, Labour good.
Yeah.
Now, they may well be right in criticising some of the decisions by the Conservative government. I'm not a Conservative, I'm not Labour of any particular form, although I think the Environment Act was a massive achievement in that period. But it's completely naive to think that because Labour is left, it's therefore pro-environment in a way that other parties aren't. I think they fell for the Kool-Aid. Yeah. And the reality out there now is really very different. I think it has dawned on many environmental groups that this is not an environmentally friendly government. And I hope that leads to a serious rethink about how the environment can re-engage with politics in a way of putting forward a framework which is not anti-growth, but is supportive of a sustainable framework going forward, which touches the lives of the population, the voters more generally. There's an opportunity in here, but it's an opportunity to rethink rather than think, oh, one more little nuance here or one twist here. And it's also a wake-up call. Don't believe that Labour good, Conservative bad is the right way to think about this. We have a broad political context in which the case for nature has to be made, as in every generation, again and again and again.
Yeah, okay. My fear is that, you know, it's gone too far. And if this bill does get passed now, and particularly with the third part as it is, and the amendments are not excuse me, are not made as being requested, that we are going to end up in a very dangerous position. And I do think you're absolutely right about the environment sector. I think we've been thrown a few breadcrumbs along the way, you know, beavers, oh yes, have some beavers, have this, have that, to keep you quiet. But actually, the moment has come now. I think we're facing something really, really quite serious. And it's all to play for. It is all to play for, Dieter. And it's tactical now. It's how do we pull back from this?
Yes, the bill is going to get passed. The amendments are largely going to be lost. We are going to end up in that position. You're absolutely right. A beaver here and a beaver there. I mean, it's a good case in some circumstances for quite a few of these things, but it isn't a comprehensive addressing of the environment. The shift in the agricultural policy is not now in the direction that many of us hoped. And this is the chance to now say, let's not be delusional. Let's not think, oh, well, you know, happy clappy, it's all going to be all right, really. This is just a problem along the way. No, this is an enormous point. And I come back to where I said, where you really learn what people think is look at the performance politics. The performance politics are, it's all those horrible bats and newts that get in the way of builders who wear hard hats and are seen on infrastructure and building sites in every photo shot that's out there. That's what they mean. That's what they're signalling. And it's a failure of the environmental movement more generally to have not succeeded with an alternative narrative.
Yeah. Dieter, I think we've covered everything there. So thank you very much for your time. And yeah, let's see how it goes. Like you say, it's very likely going to go through as it is. And we have to respond to that. We have to, you know, as obviously I'm part of the environment sector, and we have to regroup and do something. But I'm going to carry on shouting. So thank you very much.
Good. Well, thank you for having me on. Thank you.